Standing up in McKinney. This is According to Callus, episode 552, part 2, 5-part series on the 5 principles. Today we're going to talk about fiscal responsibility. That's right, fiscal responsibility and why that matters to us. All right. There are the 5 principles, right? The 5 Tea Party principles. And before I get into this, because I think this is going to be a very short episode, but let me remind you, the whole emphasis of the Tea Party was distilling down everything that these disparate groups agreed to or agreed upon in theory, right? Started with personal responsibility. Of course, that gets defined differently depending where you are and who you talk to. Fiscal responsibility, it's really quite simple there. And then, of course, you've got limited government, which my libertarian friends would say, well, virtually no government. Certainly the voluntarists would. And then, of course, you go to the state or national sovereignty. In other words, we are a nation. We need to act like it. And rule of law. Nobody should be above the law. So those are the 5 principles we're going to use this week to kind of recap and encapsulate what they are, what they mean. And before I get into that today, let me just say, as a final reminder, it's not final, never going to be final. The best way you can help me make a difference, grow the show, is to like, share, and subscribe to this program. If you follow the program, whether it's on your podcatcher of choice or the social media, every little bit helps. It makes a significant difference. Last week, 4 out of the 5 days, I was north of 900. 2 of them were north of 1,000. This makes a big deal difference. When each download you get, each one that piles up together, it makes a difference. My goal for the end of the year was try and have 250,000 downloads. Very doable at this point. We're on path to get there. But the way that we do this and the reason why we're doing this, the more people that listen, the more influence we have, the more our voice gets out there, the more it gets heard. Now, I realize I occasionally get things wrong. I also realize that sometimes you're not going to agree with me. But the difference is I'll at least listen to an opposing viewpoint. I'll at least have a discussion, a dialogue. Right? I don't have to be right, even though I know myself to be right most of the time. I also acknowledge I get things wrong because I'm human. The show is called According to Callus to tell you up front, this is my opinion. This is my understanding. These are the basic facts. This is what I think about it. And that's why I'm doing this. And it's there because it's an alternate viewpoint. It's something different than what we hear from all day, every day from the usual suspects. Now, as a member of the Tea Party back in the day when we were, hopping, I want to say a couple of things about this. Because they had distilled it down to these 5 principles, because they tried to stay out of the weeds and all this other things, they were largely effective for a period of time. They did a lot of good things. Unfortunately, they allowed a lot of issues to be added in. They decided, or some of the people that were involved conflated issues. And quite frankly, we picked up a lot of people that had similar viewpoints, but had their own alternate goals or their alternate ends. I always said the Tea Party had a lot more to do with Ron Paul than it did Pat Buchanan. But both of those guys would have been happy or welcome at any Tea Party event that I ever took part in. I always said that, when I got to actually meet Matt Kibbe, and this is years ago, I was really impressed with the guy because he focused on the key points, the things that we all rally around and we all agree upon. And I know it sounds simple and it sounds stupid, but I don't understand how you can have any deviation off the idea that we need to be fiscally responsible. I mean, the Democrats or the socialists will claim one version of fiscal responsibility. Republicans, whether they're populist or conservative or libertarian leaning, will argue a different angle to that. The idea is if you don't have money, you don't spend it. If you don't have any reasonable means of paying back a loan, you don't take it. And then we're done. No, I'm kidding. But it should be that simple, right? There are certain things that government logically needs to do. national defense, border patrol, maintain agreements, foreign affairs, right? And keeping peace amongst the states, right? Sorting out and helping with agreements, if you will. Those are the roles for the national government. For a state government, honestly, it's pretty much anything and everything that the state or the people of the state want them to do. Now, you can have the ultra nanny state that you might get in California, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, New York, New Jersey. And then you get the alternate version of the nanny state, which you would get in Texas and Florida. And then you might see a glimmer of hope in states that are drifting towards more liberty: New Hampshire, Alaska, perhaps Tennessee, hopefully Texas. But these are all things that should be understood. You don't have to spend money on things that you don't need. Unless there's a justifiable need or concern, you ought not spend money on it. And you certainly shouldn't spend money that you don't have. And that's the big thing that everybody fails to realize. Government doesn't actually have money. They don't make money. They don't have a good or service that they exchange for the money. They take money. They take money from you and from me, often with a threat of violence at the point of a gun. That's not my term, that's somebody else's. And actually, it's been quoted so many times, I don't know who is actually responsible for it, so I cannot give credit where credit is due, but I will tell you it is not mine. It's not my phrase. And honestly, I'm hard-pressed to argue with it. I've always been open to the idea that maybe there are things that we need government to do. Maybe there are things that are justifiable expenses. Maybe there are some things that I'm willing to put my money in a pot so we can get a good outcome. The problem is I don't control those things. The problem is I have very little say over what they are. And the problem is it's been hijacked, quite frankly, by a bunch of people that don't share my values or my vision for what America or Texas is. And at what point do I get to say stop? At what point will they acknowledge they've taken so much money from everybody else that there's nothing left for them? Now, ideally, in their worldview, right, the socialist, Marxist, progressive, Leninist, some versions of the nationalist, key in on the socialism there, if you will, they want people to be subservient. They want people to be dependent. They want people to not be able to function without government. And what better way to do it than take away their financial means of doing things on their own? What better way of doing it than training them to think they're not capable of thinking for themselves and that they need government to do that for them? What better way to do it than to take all other options away from them and make it so difficult to be able to do anything without government approval that people just capitulate? So when they say they're spending us into oblivion, a certain part of me thinks that they're doing it on purpose, and another part of me says they just have no idea what it is they're doing because the people keep allowing this. And I think it's probably both. I think there's a large chunk of the people that are involved in government that do not understand the consequences of what they're doing. But then I think there's a smaller chunk that knows exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what their goals are. And it's, quite frankly, to strip away any authority, any power, any opportunity from any of us to make it so that we are slightly better than slaves. Serfs, if you prefer. They want us to be able to look out for ourselves. In other words, we're not fully dependent on them, but they want us all to understand that there is nothing we can do without their blessing, without their support, and without their approval. Maybe not even in that order. Sadly, they're not far. They're not far from achieving that goal, that dream. The United States is such a mess right now. These United States really can't function without the government intervention at the federal level. Now, the opportunity exists. The state of Texas can say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we're not going to participate. You know what? We're out. You know what? You stay over there. You know what? This is our state. We're going to do our thing. But even our state won't lead like that because we're fiscally irresponsible. The state of Texas has a significant amount of money left over at the end of the year, and they're just looking for excuses to spend it on stuff. They're looking for new ideas and other things they can, quote, invest our money in instead of giving it back to the people they took it from in the first place. See, they want us to be fiscally responsible. They punish us for having too much debt. They punish us for not paying back loans. Unless, of course, you're a student. Well, that's a different story. They have zero interest in giving anybody any slack except for themselves. And there's zero consequences for their bad behavior. And they've gone so far as to tilt the entire system that people that run companies poorly get bailed out. People that run companies into the ground still get their bonuses. They have tilted all of the law enforcement to go after we, the people. Now, some on the socialist side would say, well, yeah, of course. They're in the pocket of big business. Yeah, of course, they're fascists. But the irony is, the sad irony is, the socialists don't seem to understand that this is exactly how it is in a socialist world too. They just do it under the auspices of this is a government-run company and the government needs more. And you have no say because they let you know flat out from the beginning, you're not in charge. You don't matter. And we don't care. So that puts you in an interesting conundrum, right? They take everything from you to finance all the things that maybe you might benefit from under the auspices of you want it even though you don't. And if you don't, then they say, well, the majority does. Well, the majority doesn't have the right or the ability to steal from somebody else just because they're a majority. Might allegedly doesn't make right, but clearly everything that we see states otherwise. Now, it's interesting to me to look back. You know, it's been 10 years, if you will, since the Tea Party got rolling. Actually, more than that. I guess it's 15. Maybe even, 15 years at this point. But the reality is, there are a lot of things that were impugned upon them. A lot of things that were projected on them. And usually it's by leftists, right? They say that we wanted to do these things. They say we felt these things. They say we want, or that we demanded certain things to be done or changed. But in fact, the progressives are the ones that have always been pushing for those things. They're always pointing it out. They're always demanding things. They're always shifting the outcomes. And for once, we had a group of people that said enough is enough and we're going to push back. We're going to have a counter reaction. And they were the ones that were the bad guys. Does any of this sound familiar? Does any of this sound like what's been going on? So then we got Trump that rolls under the seam. Now, look, I have mixed feelings about the Donald, but in 2016, he won fair and square. We heard for a year plus how he cheated, there was stolen, Russian collusion, this, that, and the other thing. And honestly, most of the people on the right kind of chuckled and said, you're crazy. He's a good candidate. He is a good populist. And honestly, most of what the Tea Party wanted were things that would be populist in nature. Populism or populist ideals aren't necessarily diametrically opposed to liberty. They're looking at the greater good, but the least amount of punishment for others, I guess, be the way I would look at it. Now, you can choose to disagree with my explanation there. And then 2020 rolls around, and everybody that questioned anything is vilified, called names, run in the ground, abused, arrested. Anybody that did anything that is even slightly pushing back about what the narrative was, between that and, well, the events of the plandemic, scandemic, yes, all that stuff can be real, but it's being used to weaponize and go after we the people, to punish we the people, and to spend enormous amounts of money. You wondered where the tie-in was here, right? Do you really think they would have spent those trillions upon trillions of dollars on, let's call them foolish expenses, if they didn't think they could get away with it? Now, the Donald is not innocent in this. The Donald went along with it for various reasons, and I don't know what's in the man's heart or mind. I suspect that he felt like he had no other choice. But again, we were being manipulated. We, the people, got a false bill of goods. It was bad enough we had the bailouts in 2008. It was bad enough that we had more bailouts to follow. It was bad enough that we paid companies to close. We paid people to stay at home. And then we paid people that stayed in business in spite of it all with other people's money. And you want to talk about fiscal responsibility? Come on. Does anybody actually believe that's obtainable now? I mean, they have all but run the economy into the toilet. They've all but spent us into oblivion. I believe we're in both situations. We're in dire situations here. It's really hard to argue for fiscal responsibility when everybody has ignored it completely since 2019. It doesn't even matter what side of the aisle you're in, where you are on the political spectrum. Except for a few libertarians and I guess a few populists or conservatives out there. Everybody went along with this whole game. We all got the buy-in and they ran us into the ground. How do you teach fiscal responsibility? How do you show fiscal responsibility? Well, clearly you cannot follow your leaders. What you can do, though, is you can get out of debt as much as possible. You can pay off loans ahead of time. You can minimize the additional loans or the additional leveraging that you do. Now, I understand sometimes you have to take on debt. I have debt. I had to take it on. I didn't have a choice. Circumstances allow for me to get out of debt from time to time and stay out of debt for longer periods of time. But everything has a cost. Very few people can go out and buy a house for cash. More people, but still quite a few, can barely afford to go buy a car for cash. So you're going to have to take a loan. You're going to have to do these things. Nobody can afford to, well, I shouldn't say nobody. Well, 1% of the population might be able to afford to go to college for 4 years without taking on debt. But the idea is minimize it, reduce your exposure, reduce your risk, and know that if you have a debt, that you have a way to pay it off. Now, sometimes when you take debt, the payment schedule allows for you to actually make more money by spreading out your payoff. Okay, that makes sense in some instances, but it's still not a good idea to be leveraged to somebody else, right? When you're in debt, they own you. Unless, of course, you're the Donald where you take on so much debt that you, in fact, own them because they can't afford for you to fail. Does that sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? Too big to fail? Yes. It's been a well-known ploy. But you and I, we the people, very few of us have that kind of leverage, that kind of debt, that kind of angle where we can call the tune. The same goes for family, right? If you're loaning a family member money, chances are you should just look at it as a gift. You're looking out for your family. You're encouraging them, you're helping them, and you don't necessarily expect it back. Now, that's real easy to say when most people don't have but $500, $1,000 that they can give away to somebody else and not think about. And far fewer people have that, more than that. And almost nobody's going to forgive a loan for $10,000. Just not. Because it's important. It's necessary. It's part of a functioning life. But again, you're trying to look out for fiscal responsibility. If I'm giving somebody money, I would expect there's some kind of return. It doesn't matter what it is, even if it just makes me feel good that I gave somebody money. But I can't give money that I don't have. And I can't have money if I'm giving it all away to other people under the threat of violence at the point of a gun. It's just a very interesting situation, isn't it? The same thing coalesces with community, right? If you're wealthy, if you have that money and you can donate or you can loan and you can help your community around you, that's fine. You want to do it, but there's got to be something in it for you. We all understand this. It's innately known nobody does something for nothing, at least not long term. That's called being fiscally responsible. Whether you're being fiscally responsible for you yourself or you and your family or your extended family or your community as a whole. You don't want your city to take on more debt that can ever possibly pay off, Frisco. You don't want your debt to spiral out of control that it's just unmanageable for an entire city, Los Angeles. It's not fair to your friends. It's not fair to your family. It's not fair to your community to be irresponsible. Yet it seems that most of our leaders, that's what they do best. They act in an irresponsible manner because there is zero consequences for them. Now, if you take out money to buy a home and you don't make those payments, they come and take your home from you. If you take out money to buy a car and you don't make those payments, they come and take your car from you. But if you're a city leader or even a state leader and you take on more debt than you can possibly ever pay back, they don't come and take anything from you. No, they punish the people. They punish we, the people, for your irresponsible behavior. There is zero accountability or consequences for our state, for our federal, but certainly even for our city leadership. Nothing ever happens to these guys and ladies. So the question is how do we hold them accountable? Well, one, we got to quit letting them just take out loans for no apparent reason. Even if we might even think it's a good idea, we got to make sure there's terms of those loans make sense. And there's got to be a little sting in it for these people that took on the debt if they're going to do it at our expense. I mean, think about every expenditure that goes on, and just we're going to talk about McKinney for just a moment. Is it any surprise that there's always people on the receiving end of these debt loans, or that the loans finance certain things that just happen to benefit other people or other investors? I always found it interesting that the neighboring property just happens to be owned by somebody that's going to see an uptick. Funny how that happens. Well, I'd like to know where their skin in the game is. I know they're going to get a giant payoff. So where was their investment? Oh, you bought a piece of dirt that you just happen to know is going to be worth, 5 or 10 times its value in a few years. Well, that's great for you. But I had to pay for it because the city took money from me to pay for the expansion that's going to cause you to make a profit. I'm wondering what the city got out of it. These sweetheart deals, they happen all the time. It's part of doing business. We get it. And if you're looking out for the city overall and the city truly, really benefits, all right, fine. But more often than not, it's the half a dozen people that make off like bandits. The city gets a marginally nice thing, and the rest of us get left holding the bag when it doesn't go the way they told us it was going to go. And how do we fix that? Throw the bums out. That's all there is to it. Right? If you want fiscal responsibility, you've got to punish people for bad fiscal behavior. That's all there is to it. You got to have a consequence. You can't arrest them. You can't take their house. You can't punish them in any way, shape, or form other than removing them from the reins of power. That's the only way forward. I'm sorry to be a downer on that one, but look, the Tea Party existed for a reason. They were reacting to the fact that they were taxed enough already. They've tried to cue in and focus in on the few things they thought they might be able to change. And here, 15 years later, how successful have they been? I'll let you draw your own conclusions. And with that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.